We are on now. Good afternoon, colleagues, and welcome to our discussions. Video. Hello?
Yes, we can hear you. We can hear you.
Thank you very much. We want to deeply apologize for this whole technical challenge that we are having. I think it's been very unfortunate. We really want to thank you very much for your patience. And we are looking at your time. We really want to respect your time and want to consult with you. We have barely another less than an hour of the scheduled time left. And we're wondering if it wouldn't be a better idea to stand the meeting down for today and regroup for another time. We don't want to overstretch your patience and your cooperation in this. We know that because of the technical challenge, we've already lost more than 30 minutes of the opening time.
Actually, since I'm going to Europe, you guys are doing Europe. No.
Hello? Would be glad to hear your thoughts very quickly.
Say that again, George. I didn't hear what you meant. I didn't hear.
Yes, what we're proposing, first of all, we apologize most sincerely for all the challenges you've all faced. And want to thank you for the patience expressed. But we were wondering that looking at the time lost and what is left, if it wouldn't be a good idea to stand this meeting down today and plead with you that we regroup another time.
Well, you know, Georgia, I blocked in today and I had other commitments and I put that behind because we had already agreed. Now rescheduling this week is going to, because we already have something on Thursday with the Southern Africa caucus. So I don't know how quickly we can get back on the West Africa because, you know, as I said, you know, it's a very busy week. We've locked in these days for you. Now regrouping again, I'm not sure whether that would be possible, at least in the next 2 weeks.
Okay.
I think I agree with Rukaya. Please, is it possible to shift the next group's meeting by the number of hours or minutes lost so that we can get this done and then they can also join? Because we never know whether they would also face similar situations as ours today. So that's my suggestion.
Well, what we were thinking was that we could keep the two other programs and then reschedule today. So it is only today's meeting and would have worked in accordance with your convenience so that together we could work out a date that works for all of us post the two other events.
Hi, George. It's Sanusha Naidu.
Hi, Sanusha. Welcome.
Hi. Thank you. Welcome, colleagues. Greetings, everyone. Yeah, I think for Thursday, which is where we are convening as the Institute for Global Dialogue, and we had met with the panelists yesterday as a kind of debrief of what we are going to be doing logistically, etc. We've already had confirmations for the time on Thursday, and from invited participants, and of course from our colleagues both at the IGD and other colleagues from other institutions. So we would keep to the time. We did a dry run with the link. We don't envisage this technical glitch, but of course we never know. But we don't think it will go, if there is a technical glitch on our end, it won't be longer than what we anticipate. So I think for me personally, I would just want to keep that meeting for the 7th, for the time scheduled, and maybe then take this meeting post that meeting and post the East African forum or discussion.
So maybe let me restate. That it is only this meeting that we are seeking to reschedule. All other programs will stay the same. So we'll not change anything else other than this particular meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Well, can we get some other perspective, and then we could see whether we are proceeding with the discussions even for the time left, or we agree to reschedule this one so that we don't spend too much time if we are going to. So can we hear one more comment and then?
George, my suggestion is we reschedule, and we could do it after the East African meeting.
Okay, that's Charlie. Oh no, that's Ruben. Ruben, how are you?
I'm fine, thanks. How are you?
Great. Your signal is very strong today. We hope that we will get it.
Well, I passed through a witch doctor's place, so they moved my signal.
Keep that witch doctor in your car.
George, it's Rukaya again. I'm looking at the number of participants, which is 13. I'm not sure whether you're planning to get more than that. With 13, and we've got just maybe a little, we can probably beg the indulgence of our panelists and our participants, if we could just go to for just an hour, so 18, go an hour from now. And I think with what we have, 13 participants, I believe we can use that time in a diligent way, because rescheduling even past the East Africa one, for me, is problematic, because, you know, we run into imperatives, and there are, you know, the week of the next couple of weeks are extremely busy. So I was wondering if you can't diligently use that 1 hour. We only have 13 participants, and I think with excellent moderation, which I'm sure you will provide, we can at least get that done, you know, because we've blocked that time, you know. I'm sorry to be, but to insist on that.
Yeah, you are right. It's technology that has put all of us into this. And so Rukaya restates her suggestion that we proceed. Colleagues, what do you also think? If we could get just one more.
Well, I agree with Rukaya, but the problem is there are other people who might be presenting today who can't connect, because I still see on the page that people cannot connect. So,
well, I think that for those who are struggling, at least for now, they are all online. So fortunately, we have everybody who was trying to connect.
Okay, then I agree with Rukaya. We can squeeze.
Okay. So on that note, it seems to me that we could together say welcome to everybody, and I'm going to cut a lot of the initial protocols.
Yes.
Except to welcome all of you. We've shared the background concept, so all of you are aware of why we are here today. I'm also going to limit my introduction of the panelists, also because we are sharing all that with you. And again, to save a bit of time. So let me get into the discussions with you by welcoming Professor Kwesi Prempeh, Executive Director of the Ghana Center for Democratic Development, to make some quick remarks, and then we can hear our panelists.
Okay, good afternoon here from Accra. I think I will be brief given the circumstances. I think for those of you who have been part of this program from the beginning of the year, you know, the program doesn't need introduction, CDD doesn't need introduction, except to say that, you know, the international political environment, the landscape that we faced as CDD at the beginning of the 1990s when we were founded, seems to have undergone quite some significant change. in more recent years. At the time, we were almost in the immediate aftermath of the Cold War. There was a sense that we were almost veering towards a unipolar world. Of course, events subsequent have proven that to have been some kind of a premature speculation. Now we have an important new player in the international political environment, that being China. And I think this program for me is really an opportunity for us to assess what the implications of that might be for those of us who have been doing democracy work in Africa since the 1990s. And so that is really the big motivation for our interest in this. How is China's presence going to impact the work that we've done over the years on the continent, in Ghana, in the region? Through Afrobarometer, we have a bit of a sense of how Africans feel about it, what their views are about China and about many other players in our space. I think this is more an opportunity for us to have a deeper dive into the question so that we might better understand this new kid on the block, so to speak, and how its presence in this space might affect the kind of work that we do, or is already affecting the kind of work that we seek to do as a pro-democracy think tank. So that's really the motivation for this, and we are happy that the initial group that we began with, the idea of this one is to bring in many other participants within the regions so that we could share ideas with a bigger audience. So I'm glad that we have this follow-up on our seminar, and I hope that it would be as interesting and as vibrant in terms of the intellectual exchanges and the knowledge sharing as the seminar was in the first half of the year. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kwesi. So we return to our discussions. As Kwesi has implied, the simple reality that we are dealing with is that we are, all of us, involved in a very complicated process towards the continent's development. And at this point in time, all of us are concerned about Africa in the modern world, and particularly our relationship with the rest of the world in a globalized environment. One of the key things that has come up in all these development debates is the current relationship that China, for example, has with the continent. And the researchers who are speaking to us today have been doing considerable work on this issue and would want to share some specific perspectives with us. Let me just quickly introduce to us the panelists. We have Rukaya Kasnelli, a democracy scholar and associate professor in media and political systems at the University of Mauritius. Rukaya has done considerable work in the area of media and democracy. You have a full bio in the materials we sent you, and so we won't say more, but there is more to learn about Rukaya. And then there is Charlie Marshall Ngunu Poini, who is the co-founder of Afro Leadership, a civil society organization promoting democracy, human rights, digital rights, and data rights in Africa. And Ngunu is also an expert in democratic governance and has been working on the Sino-Africa relationship and would be speaking to us about some specific questions that he raises in his research work. Let me quickly say that Rukaya's project, titled The Trappings of the Mauritius Safe City Project, Rukaya will say a word about it. Charlie Marshall's research and the discussion is revisiting Chinese-led public contracts in Cameroon. And then we have Emmanuel Safa Abdullahi. Emmanuel is a human rights and pro-democracy lawyer with over 20 years experience. He's a political affairs cluster chair at the African Union's Economic, Social, and Cultural Council. And Emmanuel did Another interesting work on Sierra Leone relations with the wavering titan, meaning China. And we also have Ruben Lefuka. Ruben runs an environmental management firm called Rain Zambia Limited, and is also the chapter president of Transparency International Zambia and the vice chairperson of the Global Board of Directors of TI. Ruben's work is titled The Impact of Chinese Construction Companies on Combating Corruption in the Zambian Construction Sector. And then we have Pauline Anaman, a technical consultant in the economics and governance of energy and the extractive sector, as well as issues of climate change and energy transition. Pauline's work, titled The Fundamentals of China's Sharp Power in Ghana, is based on her research in Ghana. And we are lucky to have a colleague from South Africa to give us some privileged comments. Ms. Sanusha Naidu, a foreign policy and political analyst based in Cape Town. Sanusha has been working on democracy, development, and the political economy of Africa's international relations and South Africa's foreign policy. So we want to, without further ado, get back to all of you and to begin the discussions. First, let me indicate that what is common about all these research projects is that all the researchers raise significant concerns about the transparency of China's dealings with Africa, particularly regarding major infrastructure projects. And so we want to start with each one of them giving us just a 1-minute comment on the projects they did and why they thought transparency is an issue. And I begin this with Rukaya Kasinelli. Rukaya, the floor is yours.
Thanks, George. In 1 minute, I think, what really drew me to this particular project was really, as you say, the lack of transparency and the culture of opacity that surrounded it. The project cost millions of US dollars. Firstly, no one knew about it. There are systems of checks and balances like the Parliament, the National Audit Committee, which tried to understand a little bit what was going on. So for me, this was a big, big red flag. Why was so much money going into a project that, for me, had no real validity? Because Mauritius is a secure place, the crime rate is low. So the validity behind wanting to push for a full-blown safe city was very problematic. And in my research, I actually saw that, I was trying to dig, I was trying to get access to information, and doors were closed. I had to use my own network to start to sort of get people to speak very often off record. So there was a lot of opacity around this project. But what also was equally important was that it was starting to claw into what I call certain civil liberties and political rights. Big Brother, surveillance, cameras around your neighborhood. So it started to become very, very uncomfortable for me to realize, that why was so much money being used? Why was there no official disclosure? Why were the clause of confidentiality always used when questions were asked in Parliament, when questions were asked by the National Audit Bureau, when civil society themselves started to ask questions? So this really rang, alarm bells for me, especially coming from a country like Mauritius, which has always been a democratic lighthouse in Africa. So were we going down that authoritarian sort of route where Big Brother, surveillance, data control was starting to happen? So, number of red flags, and I'll probably have the opportunity to sort of highlight some of those important ones. Thank you.
Thank you, Rukaya. I would now want to come to Charlie Marshall also to, in a minute, tell us a bit about your project and why you think that transparency is an issue for you. Charlie? Okay, so whilst waiting to check on Charlie's connection, may I go to Emmanuel? Emmanuel's work in Sierra Leone was on the Sierra Leone relationship with China. And Emmanuel, you also raised concerns about transparency. Would you want to quickly share your project with us and to tell us why, for you, transparency is also an issue there? Do we still have Emmanuel? Okay. So whilst waiting for Emmanuel, I would want to go to Ruben. And I hope that Ruben is still online.
Yes.
Ruben, great. So Ruben, you had done a very interesting project on the impact of Chinese construction companies on combating corruption in the Zambian construction sector. Would you want to speak to us about your project and again, give us an indication why transparency is an issue for you?
Thank you very much, George. Just by way of background, which George may not have mentioned, I'm an architect and a chartered environmentalist, and therefore the issues of the construction sector are close to my heart. The construction sector in Zambia, like elsewhere in Africa, has been growing, and it continues to play a vital role in the economic development of our countries. But this phenomenal increase in the number of both local and foreign companies has brought with it challenges in terms of ethical conduct and corruption. I focused on the Chinese companies because Chinese companies in the Zambian construction sector are one of the largest players. 80% of the foreign-owned companies in this sector are Chinese. And coupled with that, 85% of the financing for either road rehabilitation or new large-scale road construction, bridges, among others, has been coming from China. So I was interested to see how the involvement of the Chinese companies in this space has either negatively or positively influenced the anti-corruption reforms. And I took the cue from the fact that the Chinese president has been very strong on anti-corruption. To what extent has that desire to deal with the deep endemic corruption in China been transferred to other countries where Chinese companies are playing a critical role? And therefore, the question that I was addressing is whether the state of corruption in the Zambian construction sector is any different today following the involvement of international Chinese construction companies. And I asked this question taking into account the fact that corruption has been prevalent in the construction sector, but has the involvement of the Chinese companies been any bonus, so to say, to change the landscape, or has the situation remained largely the same? So I'll talk some more about some of the findings when we come to the next round.
Ruben, I will let you continue from there. You posed the question, has the involvement of the Chinese changed the dynamics of transparency in the construction industry? What did you find?
Well, what I found is that it's strangely enough, by the very conduct of Chinese companies, from the manner in which they enter into the construction sector in Zambia, it is not possible for them to change the corruption landscape. Chinese companies previously were not engaged in African countries and other developing countries, but they came in as state-owned enterprises, and they were executing specific projects which were funded by the Chinese company, the Chinese government. So they were given this privilege to enter into a market with access to financing and with protection from the Chinese government. When they enter into a market like the Zambian market and they execute the Chinese government-funded projects, they have the tendency of staying on and registering local companies and start to compete with local entities. So they have the advantage of access to cheaper money, they have the advantage of access to protection from the Chinese government, and yet they have to compete with local entities who do not have similar privileges. Additionally, what I found is that in entering a market such as Zambia, the Chinese companies did undercut the competition. So they moved in and undercut the local rates and operated on profit margins of under 10% compared to the average industry profit margins of between 15 to 25%. But that in itself was intended to be a marketing strategy. Once they get the job, what has been found and from my research is that the final contract cost is always much, much higher than the initial contract costs. But they did undercut the competition, and therefore they've established themselves as the largest entity in the Zambian construction sector. There's an element of preferential and supply-driven financing, which is worrisome in my view, because a lot of the money is coming from Chinese entities, whether it's China Exim Bank or the Development Bank in China or other entities. Most of the funding for the large-scale construction projects come as a package. It's a package financing deal. In other words, China will provide the financing to Zambia on the understanding that Chinese companies will undertake the work. And this in itself, therefore, crowds out the local players and other foreign-owned companies who are operating in this space. And that's why you see that in the last 10 or so years, 23 major contracts, out of the 23 major construction contracts, 16 of them went to Chinese companies. But the Chinese contractors have also started what they call a contractor facilitated initiative. In this particular initiative, the contractor goes to government and gives them the assurance that they'll look for money for a construction project on the understanding that government should provide the guarantee. Now, they're doing a lot of lobbying and essentially selling projects which are not priority to government, but government buys a bet because the funding is there. And from an election point of view, political point of view, it does look good to do a road project without having to fund it now, but with the intention of repaying or rebasing the funding later. So lastly, George, there's a lot of non-competitive bidding and collusion happening with the involvement of Chinese players. Most of the state-owned enterprises working in this space tend to compete, quote unquote, against one another, but in essence, it's due to collusion. They give each other chances, but they also determine the specification and the conditions of contracts. So in other words, in instances where they're not happy with the contract conditions, the bigger players who have the capacity to undertake the construction projects simply do not bid, forcing government to go back to them, knowing fully well they'll not get any other player on the market with the capacity to deliver, and they then negotiate the terms of the contract, which are more favorable to them and not any other player. I'll stop there for now.
That's very interesting. Rukaya, Ruben makes two interesting allegations. One is that the Chinese are essentially manipulating the contract management processes, and is also arguing that some of the projects are unsolicited, thereby suggesting that the priority of government is, as it were, completely thwarted or undermined. You made similar arguments in the Safe City project. Would you want to speak to us about that? Questions about contract management and the point about the importance of the Safe City project and how it originated.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks, George, and thanks, Ruben, for really sort of setting the scene in terms of the modus operandi or the methodology of Chinese sort of entry into African markets. Now, there was something very important that Ruben highlighted, and that really started like a glow in my head, like saying selling projects that are not of priority to many African governments. Now, the Mauritius Safe City project is not a priority. It's what we call a sort of a trophy project. I mean, it looks good to have a safe city and also have, what they call the other one, the smart city. But it's not a priority for many governments when you think about, the more pressing sort of projects of infrastructure. So they sell it, they package it, they have an approach which is linked to a Chinese company like Huawei, which is technically a private company, but also operates in a very interesting method in terms of how it is coupled together as a project. Then they come in with the Exim Chinese bank, which offers you very preferential loan. And then you also are linked to the whole process of technology use, which Huawei will then serve. So for me, this really is problematic because, you're pushing a certain type of infrastructure and this infrastructure, will burden many countries because they are irrelevant, they are not necessary. The other thing that, which also is very much the way that Chinese operate is, Ruben talked about non-competitive bidding. I talk about unsolicited bidding because the Mauritius Safe City was not a priority. Then it became a priority following an unsolicited bid by Huawei that really went behind closed doors. And we see the whole process around, the project. There is what we call a procurement act in Mauritius, but this procurement act was floated against, and there is a provision which says that the Prime Minister can use a waiver subsection to say that in the interest of national security and interest, unsolicited and non-competitive bidding can go. So I think that cases a lot of questions around, who's getting those contracts, what are the inside information, and that poses us into wonder, are we being, burdened with debts that we will not be able to pay in the years to come, because this particular project is over 20 years and you're locking in over 20 years, a loan that is growing by the year and is, and it's creating a lot of problems. So I think this for me has been very significant in terms of understanding, the contracts behind that, the manner in which, this unsolicited bid was managed, the manner in which, the Procurement Act was not, dealt with in the proper manner, because the Procurement Act actually promotes competitive bidding and ensures, that the level playing field is cut across. So I think it creates a new ecosystem of doing major infrastructure in Mauritius, and we might be entering an approach that might, in the years to come, create more problems than solutions. So a lot of red flags, a lot of alarm bells going on, and the fact that each time that a question is asked either in Parliament or through other official channels, that the bid of confidentiality, or the concept of confidentiality is waived to say that this information cannot be given. So I think that really poses major problem. And I think the manner in which Huawei is unfolding, because Mauritius is one of the few countries, I think, where the 5G has just rolled out. So we are starting to build that infrastructure that is becoming much more sort of big brother and overseeing, and the surveillance factor kicking in.
Very much. Pauline, is Pauline online?
Yes, please, I'm here.
Pauline, I want you to address something very specific for us. Between Ruben and Rukaya, there's a certain proposition that China is able to secure unsolicited contracts with our government and under terms that are not transparent. As a sovereign state in each of our countries as a sovereign state, one would have imagined that they should have the right to accept or reject any proposal based on their own priorities. And therefore, one would not necessarily say that is a China issue. But you say that the PRC, and I'm quoting from your project, the PRC has used its economic power to forcefully frustrate the rule of law in Ghana and also to manipulate contracts. In other words, you seek to promote the idea that my proposition that sovereign nations should be able to withstand China is not entirely the case because they are able to use their economic power to forcefully impose certain wills. To what extent can you use your project in Ghana to illustrate this proposition? So if in a minute you could tell us what your project was about, and in another minute, explain to us the point that you make that appears to follow the arguments that both Rukai and Ruben are making. I'm told that Charlie and Emmanuel are back online, and so please, I'll be coming to you very soon. So the mic is yours, Pauline.
Thank you so much, Doc. So you gave a good introduction to my work because I was thinking that as a democratic state, it would be difficult for China's sharp power to materialize in Ghana, but the research showed otherwise. The key case theory for me was that it seems that China's sharp power in Ghana is, China attempts to use soft power. That's what we already know, supporting the country economically in various ways. But that use of soft power has changed into something else, the sharp power. And China has used its economic means to entrench autocratic values. So I'll give an example. So in Ghana here, we have processes and procedures for the award of contracts, and we follow that strictly. But from the research, I have seen that China is able to walk in and out of contracts with the government of Ghana at will, just because they have the money and the means to do so. A case in point is how the Chinese manipulated the StarTimes digital terrestrial television deal with the government of Ghana. And this deal was signed in 2012 between government of Ghana and StarTimes to help the government transition from analog to digital TV broadcasting. But in 2015, StarTimes exited the deal, and they argued that they did not secure the necessary funding from the Chinese Exim Bank. But insider information shows that during that time in 2015, the government of Ghana undertook a crackdown on illegal mining, which involved Chinese nationals. Some were deported, and the Chinese government was displeased with that, and they exited the deal. When they exited the deal, the government awarded the contract to a Ghanaian company, KNet. The Ghanaian company executed the contract to 90% completion. And then in 2018, the Chinese came back again, asking the government to give the contract back to StarTimes as a condition for the award of a $19 million loan agreement. And in that same $19 million loan agreement, there was also a condition for StarTimes to be awarded the contract to extend satellite TV to 300 villages in Ghana. So the Chinese walked out on the deal just because their nationals were affected when Ghana was trying to sanitize the small-scale mining industry. And then they came back to the table using their economic powers, asking the government to award the contract to StarTimes as a condition for giving the government a $19 billion loan. There's also a second instance where the Chinese, in 2018 again, there was another crackdown on illegal mining, and that involved a lady called Aisha.
Hello, hold on, Pauline.
Yes.
Please, I would be very glad if our colleagues who are not immediately speaking could mute their microphones so we avoid feedback. Thank you very much. Pauline, sorry, continue.
Okay, please, can I continue now?
Please do.
Okay, so I've already spoken about the StarTimes deal and how the Chinese manipulated that deal, going in and out of the contract because of their displeasure with government's crackdown on illegal mining, and also coming back in using the deal award of the contract as a condition for a 19 billion loan with the government of Ghana. Now, the second instance has to do with the Sino-Hydro deal. It's also a $2 billion deal involving development of infrastructure for the bauxite industry. In that deal, so because of this deal, the government had to let go one Aisha Juan, who is a queen in illegal mining in Ghana. For the avoidance of that, I want to emphasize that small-scale mining in Ghana is restricted to Ghanaians. Foreigners are not allowed to do that. But in Ghana, the Chinese are heavily involved in small-scale mining under the guise of providing technical services to indigenous Ghanaian companies. Now, Aisha Juan, a Chinese national, is heavily involved in illegal mining. She's controlling a lot of the small-scale mines in Ghana, and she's even involved in a murder issue. One of her staff witnessed her shooting a Ghanaian dead. She was arraigned before the High Court in Ghana. She was supposed to go through trial, and the High Court let her go. Now, some years later, nobody understood why that happened. And then some time later, the senior minister, Mr. Osafo Mafo, tried to justify why Aisha was released to the Chinese government, because the Chinese government demanded for her release. And he said that we need money. Putting Aisha in jail in Ghana is not going to solve our money problems. We already have a good relationship with the Chinese. The Sino-Hydro deal is a deal that was already in the pipeline, which needed to be executed, and that keeping Aisha would mean Ghana might lose that deal. And so we had to circumvent our rule of law in order for China to fund the Sino-Hydro deal. So these two instances speak clearly to how the Chinese have used their economic powers to interfere in our democratic practices as and when they please. And it also shows how weak our government is in terms of responding to some of these sharp power practices the Chinese have exercised in Ghana. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pauline. Is Charlie back online?
Yes.
Okay, Charlie, Pauline makes a very interesting point about how the government of China uses power to manipulate contracting processes in Ghana. She argues about how the cancellation of one contract that is completely unrelated to another led to the suspension of grants to Ghana. You make a similar point about cross-default provisions in China and Cameroon contracts. In other words, the similarities between the point that Pauline is making and yours is that when it comes to China, action relating to one contract can lead them to take action on a contract that has no community of interest with the original contract. So if we're dealing with two sets of contracts, contract A, contract B, what happens to contract A can easily affect contract B, even though the two contracts have no community of interest. You make a similar such point, and you argue that it is a very consistent practice where cross-default provisions exist in contracts, and therefore what happens in one contract can affect the other. Would you want to explain further what this means by first telling us a bit about your project, and then if it is possible to hone in a bit on the Bini Awara project and how the cross-default provisions in the contract is illustrated in 2 minutes?
Yeah, thank you. I'm sorry for this because I was not in as a panelist. So, no, I think what we can say, I work on the revisiting Chinese-led public contracts in Cameroon, but from what I see colleagues telling us today, it's clear that China relationship with African countries leaves exactly same trail as we have a colleague. It seems like they are actually describing the situation that we face in Cameroon. And I would just illustrate this with some little peculiar situation projects with Cameroon. First of all, let me state that out of Cameroon external debt, it is officially recognized that 60% is owed to China, making Beijing the country's largest creditor, as you might say. And that means also that China has become the main bilateral funder of infrastructural project in Cameroon. But what we've noticed, and you will notice it with what colleagues are saying, is that Chinese funded projects are designed in a way that is very complex in their architectures. And what we see as we discover, as through this project we discover it, is that most of those projects, the intricacies of those projects are not, or of those contracts are totally unknown. And I think that's the issue. And when you get to this Winnie Awara project, that is a dam project, 79 megawatt dam project in the Adamawa region. That is not yet, they have not yet built the dam for several years now. And even though, in spite of the fact that at times the project stopped, and then people thought that maybe Cameroon doesn't comply with some of the requirements that are still unknown for the public. And then when the government found money in some other ways, to comply with the requirements of the contracts, Winnie Awara didn't actually move on. And so parliamentarians had to ask to the minister, what is happening with this Winnie Awara, especially because populations everywhere were actually expressing their dissatisfaction for electricity provision in that particular region. And then the ministry had officially to admit that the reason for this suspension of Winnie Awara project was, kind of activation of cross-default clauses in most of in one of the contracts that no one knows here when it comes to the public. So the problem that we face, and you will see this in Mauritius or Zambia, the problem is first that nobody, all those clauses in contracts or in debts, debt scheme are unknown to the public. But in Cameroon, we previously had a website, a platform where the Ministry of Economy that is in charge of this debt negotiation with foreign countries, the Ministry of Economy had set up a platform where you will get fresh information about about debts, about borrowing borrowing in Cameroon. But they shut down the platform, and so the platform is no more available for the public. And this shows clearly that the more people know about what is going on with China, the more people express dissatisfaction. And this cross-default clauses has nothing to do only with project. It has also to do with what Rukaya and Robin just said, and Pauline, that some of the things that will happen to China in Cameroon, to Chinese in Cameroon, are covered by those provisions. So it's like a general provision. It might not be actually stated for this sort of behavior against Chinese in Cameroon, but it is clear that nobody can go against a Chinese in Cameroon and win. You cannot even bring a Chinese to court. You will be free, and you are in your country, and you feel yourself totally disarmed when you have a relationship or maybe a business relationship with a Chinese, and you clearly you see the impact of this in the East region, where you have mining activity from Chinese contractors, and those Chinese contractors they don't have authorization, they don't have they leave mining shafts everywhere, and they are actually subcontractors to so many people who have mining contracts. And so you see clearly that they are imposing themselves through this sort of contract schemes debt schemes that are still unknown. And for me, that's a critical point. And when this debt maturity, and as you know, will certainly be on, then we will certainly discover the dramatic situation that our country are about to face. And that's the real issue for me as I go through this research work. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is Emmanuel online?
Yes, please, I'm here.
Okay. Emmanuel, Charlie Marshall just spoke about a number of things. One of the things that he points out is, again, linking to all the speakers about the lack of transparency. And he makes the point that in relation to that project in Cameroon, the Bini Awara project, there was no information at all. Even members of parliament couldn't have access to the information. You make a similar case in Sierra Leone. Please, can everybody check your microphones to see? Okay. Now, as I was trying to say, you make the point that there is a very specific tool China uses in its contractual dealings with Africa. That tool is the borrower-lender confidentiality clause, which prohibits either party from releasing information regards to the contract to anybody. Would you want to explain that in relation to your project? So please take a minute to explain your project to us, and then talk a bit about the borrower-lender confidentiality clause that you say is the tool that they use to secure the lack of transparency that Charlie just spoke about, which Ruben and Rukaya have spoken about, and Pauline has also talked about. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much for raising the issue. The issue about Sierra Leone it's a very complex situation when you look at Sierra Leone, because the relationship with China has actually spanned decades since independence. So the project which I was looking at was basically looking at the Sierra. Yes.
Please, could you check your environment? There seems to be feedback that I don't know exactly what's causing it. If you could check it, and please continue.
Yeah, sorry, can you hear me now?
Can
you hear me clearly?
Hey, Emmanuel, we can hear you. Please go ahead.
Okay, so the Sierra Leone-Chinese relationship has spanned since independence. And one of the things that you mentioned, which has characterized that relationship, is that citizens and everyone do not know about what is happening between the government and the Chinese. So basically, my project basically looked at several projects which has happened in Sierra Leone, ranging from the seaports expansion to the toll road. And very recently, we have the Chinese building a new harbor where they believe it's a fishing harbor. Now, generally, apart from that, Sierra Leone has put itself in a situation where China has a very comfortable spot, because there have been two political parties. One is the All People's Congress, the APC, and the SLPP. Now, the APC basically wants always to lean towards the Chinese, and the SLPP will go to the global West, basically seeking policies and directives from the global West, England and the United States. Now, that is the drive. So the Chinese will always wait for our government, to see who is in government, and then they will get a natural position as to how they relate with the country. Even though very recently that the SLPP had won, they have also seen China as a new heaven where they can get free resources without good governance requirements that are normally coming from the global West. So this is what I research, looking at various contractual relationships. But one thing that basically emerged out of all of this is the fact that, there is a huge, what they call the secrecy and confidentiality clause And these clauses are very demanding on the borrower countries like Sierra Leone. And if you look at what Anna Gilpa and others found out in their research, out of 100 contracts, every 100 contracts, only 2 will not have this confidentiality clause. Basically, what the confidentiality clause is saying is that the government of the borrower country, in this case Sierra Leone, should not give out the contract or information of the relationship between China and them, not just to anybody, not just to citizens, but to anybody. So the confidentiality clause are broad. They make it extremely hard for stakeholders, including other creditors, to ascertain whether Sierra Leone or the sovereign borrower actual financial position or preferential treatment which they set. Now, this is not just happening in the mining sector or happening in the fishing sector or the toll road contract. It's happening broadly across. So China is basically saying that the government should not be held to account for what they're doing because most of the contractual agreements are vague. I'll give you an example. When they were doing the toll road, they took a skeletal agreement to Parliament for Parliament to ratify. Now, for Parliament to ratify that, Parliament needed the whole contract, and there were demands from citizens and media institutions for citizens to see the agreement. It was never produced. Even the seaport agreement, which had now been cancelled, people have been asking what is the extent of it. You know, except you get reporters having snippets of ideas that comes from top government officials. So even the MPs who are passing the agreement to make it a statutory instrument cannot see this contract. And this is dangerous because now the obligation of these loans are going to be on the citizens, they're going to be on taxpayers' money. If you look at the seaport extension, for example, it says that if Sierra Leone cannot pay back the loan, I mean, if the company that is given the loan to expand the seaport is unable to pay, the government of Sierra Leone is supposed to indemnify that company, and the Ministry of Finance is supposed to pay. So the burden is actually on the Consolidated Revenue Fund. But then the MPs, other ministries, other officials in the same department that are dealing with this have no idea what is in the contract. It is quite ridiculous, really. So because when I was doing this research, I tried to interview people in the Ministry of Finance who have agreed and signed to an agreement for the toll road project. And most of the people said, oh, we didn't see the contract. It only came from State House that you should authorize it. You know, and this is someone who has to give an approval, top government official in the Ministry of Finance. And they will tell you, no, we haven't seen the contract. And not seeing the contract means you're actually just signing a blank document and giving an approval to it because you may basically have an order from above. Nobody knows what the details are, what the fine lines are. Nobody knows what the payment agreement is. For example, two issues have emerged when you finally see this contract. Part of the loan that is given, your government is supposed to take an insurance with a Chinese company in China, in Beijing, and you take part of the loan to pay that insurance. You know, so everything seems to go back to China. And I'm clearly sure that this is one of the reasons why they don't want people to talk about this contract or to even see it. Very recently, China signed an agreement with the government of Sierra Leone to build a fishing port, which has been very controversial because it's going to destroy the rainforest. And civil society organizations are now saying, okay, in as much as the government is claiming that this is a $55 million grant to Sierra Leone, we want to see the contract. They have used the Freedom of Information law. Now, these are two NGOs, Namati and the Legal Research Forum. They've used the Freedom of Information law, which mandates public. But this ministry is the ministry of this is a generality of the issue of confidentiality and secrecy clause. And it's not just starting now that China realized that there are natural resources or raw materials. It has been the same situation since 1961 when Sierra Leone gained independence. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sanusa, are you online?
Yes, I'm here.
Yes. We've had considerable commentary from our panelists, most of them centering on lack of transparency, manipulation of contracts, using the influence of China and such like situation. You've been a researcher in the field, you live in South Africa. What is your experience, both as a researcher and also as an African citizen?
Firstly, thank you so much, George, and to the panelists. I mean, it was really insightful. I think the research was very exciting in terms of the findings that the colleagues had presented in a very fast-paced 2 minutes. More importantly, I think it's issues that are not necessarily only specific to the West African region or in the country studies that have been assessed, but rather it finds commonality and characteristics even in Southern Africa, and I suspect also in East Africa, and I think across the continent in terms of structural conditions when it comes to the role of China, the footprint of China, and China's political economic engagement with Africa. I think what's also important to bear in mind here as well is that we're in a very unique situation right now because it's the 20-year anniversary of the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation, which is going to happen in West Africa, the West African region this year. It's going to happen in, I think it's Senegal. The date hasn't been finalized, but it has been identified for this quarter, towards the end of the year, perhaps maybe before the end of December. And I think that's very significant given what we are talking about. My experience, George, has been my work on China, Africa for the last 15 years, 15 to 20 years, both as a student as well as working in different capacities around the China, Africa space, from working in a think tank as well as working in a civil society organization based in Nairobi, which was looking at precisely these issues about how does civil society define the accountability and transparency of Africa's engagement with China, not China's engagement with Africa. And I think that's a very important syntax that we need to think about, because everything that I've heard today was like deja vu for me in many ways. It was the same issues that we were raised, that we had funded through FAHAMU with funding that we had got. We had commissioned several research projects around what are the transparency questions when it comes to contracts, around infrastructure funding. What is the role of civil society acting as a serious arbitrator and a serious actor in the checks and balances around social justice questions, human rights, transparency, independence of the engagement, questions of accountability, as well as pushing China to be more of a responsible investor and a responsible trade partner from the African side, taking on the challenges that China represents in the very issues that were raised around, what are the non-disclosure agreements? What are the impacts on the environment? And using China, using the question that in China, companies have to abide by particular rules of engagement. They have to abide by particular policies, and trying to get our colleagues in China, whether it was think tanks, whether it was civil society, and yes, there does exist a civil society beyond the state one in China, and even trade unions, to try and get them to hold the Chinese government accountable in how they invest in Africa. But we seem to be coming back to the more major question in this whole discussion. And that is, what is Africa, sorry about that, what is Africa's accountability in all of this? Because at the end of the day, what I'm picking up on, and even in South Africa, given a project that we are currently coming to an end with, which is a elite perception study of the Belt and Road Initiative in South Africa. We're not even talking about the role of media, civil society. We're just talking about how elites define their relationship with China. And we're picking up on more or less similar challenges, similar questions around whether elites feel that their relationship with China needs to be protected, because at the end of the day, they see the dollar and cents. they feel that if they push China, that they would not necessarily get the kind of political economic relationship with China in terms of the loans, in terms of the concessional finance. And let's also be clear, the Chinese mode of lending is very complicated. It's complicated in the way that they lump everything together. And so what is considered as concessional finance and separated in the way that we see lending coming from Africa's developed partners is different to the way they lump everything together in the context of China. So you got to extrapolate the lending instruments, and you got to extrapolate the way in which the Chinese are now becoming risk averse. And so these projects that we're talking about, I'm wondering to what extent some of these projects, with the exception of Mauritius, I found that to be really fascinating. With the exception of the way the Chinese operate, a lot of them, quite rightly so, as Ruben had indicated, come in under state backing, and then suddenly become private sector actors in the African market, whether it's in construction, whether it's in the hydros, whether it's in these different infrastructure networks of projects. And then what they do is they start entering, in the case of Nairobi, if you take the Standard Gauge Railway, they start then entering into all kinds of different types of relationships in terms of how they go about defining their tendering process. And one of the things we picked up in the Belt and Road Perception Study was that the Chinese companies that come in terms of state-owned enterprises, and of course the Chinese state-owned enterprises are quite vast, in terms of definition and scope. And so some of them become private, some of them tend to operate like private investors, private companies, and they also tender for World Bank. So I'm wondering, in the context of tendering for World Bank projects, I think it was part of the network in East Africa where part of the road was a World Bank tender. One of the Chinese companies got kicked out of that tender because they didn't comply to the tender regulations, but also comply to transparency, accountability, and questions of having a clean governance sheet. And so they reapplied and they got put back onto the World Bank list. So I think we've got to take into account two things: how Africa's structural landscape is changing, and how political elites are defining this relationship with China. What's happening in China with the African ambassadors forum, with the African diplomatic community, and what they are basically negotiating. And it comes back to the point that Ruqayyah made, and I'll try and be as brief as possible because I'm looking at time. Why did Mauritius think they needed a safe city? If the city was safe enough, why did they think they needed a safe city? And this brings me to a point that I do see in Southern Africa, even in South Africa, where we're talking about a smart city. We don't need a smart city in South Africa, to be perfectly honest. We have serious structural conditions that need attention. We need a better road network. We need better infrastructure for socioeconomic development. We need better electricity connection, etc. But the smart city seems to be the vision of our president. Every time he speaks at a State of the Nation address, or he talks at one of these big investment conferences, he has this incredible passion for a smart city. Now, there is a smart city that supposedly is being built in South Africa, but it's kind of come to a standstill. They keep referencing it of fast trains and bullet trains and connectivity. There's also a similar kind of fast train connectivity happening in East Africa. But I think the challenge for us is to be able to ask of our political leaders and economic elites, what do you get out of this relationship with China? And why do you think these relationships, in terms of not disclosing confidentiality clauses, having a particular way in which you treat some investors and other investors, particularly domestic investors? I have the same critique in South Africa. But in South Africa, the Chinese find it a little bit more difficult because their competition with developed economies, with developed investors, it seems to lean more in their favor than with the Chinese. So there's a frustration as well. I'll stop there because I think I can come back to these points, George, in our discussion on Thursday.
Thank you very much. So first of all, a small request of you. We had originally planned to end this meeting at 3:30, As you can see, we've already overrun by 12 minutes because of the challenges we had. Our plea is that if you could accommodate us, we could go on a little while and close at 4 o'clock if it works with members. So based upon that, the hope that we agree, I want to open the discussions to any of our members, participants, anybody who has any question to raise or any comment to make. If you have a very specific question targeted at any specific person, please feel free. Otherwise, you can also ask a general question or a general comment. Thank you very much. And please, if you have, you can raise your hand if you have a question or a comment. Okay, Sanusha, if you want to raise it, I can see your hand up, is it?
Yeah, I just wanted to find out in terms of the projects themselves, the time frame that they were defined by, but also did the projects benchmark any other foreign investor or external investor? So, for example, maybe not with the developed economies, but maybe say with India or Turkey, or just looking at some of the issues that have emerged and how the Chinese are defined in that context versus, say, Turkey or India, or maybe even, I know Israel is the other muted actor in West Africa that doesn't get enough attention because the information is all very hush-hush.
Okay, thank you very much. On that one, I can indicate that it was essentially a deep dive into the China dealings with African countries. So it wasn't a comparative study. I can see Emmanuel's hand up, and then after that, I'll come to Rukaya. Emmanuel. Hello, Emmanuel.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much.
Hello, Emmanuel. Let me go to Rukaya whilst...
Two things. Yes.
Okay,
can you hear me?
Go ahead.
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me? Hello, can you hear me? Hello? Hear me now?
Hello, I can hear you. Emmanuel. Hello, Emmanuel. Let me go to Rukaya and come back to Emmanuel. Rukaya.
Thanks, George. Thank you, Sanusha, for really sort of helping us, answer some of those pressing questions. And as you rightly said, many of those issues that we attempt to sort of research in our individual pieces of capstone projects start to, we see that there is a pattern that is there. But I think the question that you mentioned about political elites and political leaders, in the recent 20 years of the 100 years of the CCP celebration, many of our political leaders, and I would say our sitting prime ministers and presidents, actually sort of, joined the fray in terms of supporting the manner in which China is promoting development. And our prime minister is quoted in public saying that, we appreciate very much the manner in which China has, been able over the years to get so many people out of poverty. And then it's also very appreciative of its developmental sort of trajectory and progress. So I think there is an increasing collusion between our political sort of elite, and I'm talking about both people in power and in opposition, because, a lot of people that I interviewed, a fair bit of politicians say that, they have very good and cordial relationship with China, because China is is a power that they would like to make sure that they are on the right side of. So I think this collusion and this understanding of shifting away from a Western way of doing business economically, diplomatically, and getting very much in sync with the Chinese way is starting to shape and change foreign policy, diplomatic approach, economic investment, cultural exchanges. And I think this is a space that we should, as civil society, as researchers, document in a very significant manner, because that shift is happening at in an accelerated mode. And I think, it's important to be able to understand the legitimacy, the political legitimacy given to China. Now, you mentioned about, other actors, how do they benchmark against Chinese investment? The case of Mauritius is interesting because I'm starting to work on the push and pull between, different actors. And to a great extent, India acts as a buffer in a certain way, quote unquote, although India also has its own sort of close dealings with Mauritius along the more recent Agaliga sort of island. What is it actually doing there? But I think in this particular case, it acts as a push and pull. And Chinese investment in Mauritius, at times sort of, because I wouldn't say gets less aggressive, but it is maybe checked against, the existing Indian sort of presence. And so that maybe is a way of buffering it, whether it's going to sort of continue along that line, or whether it's going to probably demarcate itself, because if China becomes more generous, because also we've been seeing that China is very, very generous in its free trade agreement that it has signed with Mauritius, as opposed to India. The one with India is very closed and is very sort of, defined along very few sectors, while the one with China is open-ended. It's in fact, you're allowed to operate basically everything. So I think the generosity of China is also starting to show that, well, look how generous China is, and that's starting to shift the dynamics, even in a country like Mauritius, where the push and pull between China and India, and maybe other stakeholders, Turkey and others. So I think that's something that we have to watch, and it's going to accelerate and become more and more aggressive as we go along.
Thank you very much. I can see Emmanuel's hand up. Emmanuel, I think you are muted. Hello, Emmanuel.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, I'm muted. Can you hear me?
The line is pretty bad.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
I'm here. Hello?
Hello. Hello, Emmanuel. Whilst we are waiting for Emmanuel's line to connect, if anybody wants to make a quick comment, who I can see, is it Charlie? I can see Charlie's hand. Please, Charlie, make your comment.
Yeah, just a comment that if we, as African, if we actually then build a kind of a sort of, sort of continental coalition to, to put this China's matter on the table, I think it will be difficult to, to solve this issue, because with all the historical issues that we have been facing with colonialism, imperialism, and even capitalism, the way it is, harvesting everything from Africa and looting Africa, and you see it with illicit flow, and you see clearly that Africa is being deprived of everything that it has, every resource, even this brain drain that we've got. How are we going to cope with this new issue that is adding to, to the historical one. So I think we need a great coalition against this, and CDD is doing a great job, and I think we need actually someone to lead us to build a critical mass of actors that have a good understanding of this issue, because one of the problems that we have here is that people are even not aware of what is going on. And many things have been done in secrecy, you know, being with clause of confidentiality. So if we don't fight, you know, helping actors that are in country, you know, getting support from actors that are out of the country, you know, taking Africa as one to fight against this, it will be very difficult. I wanted to make this point. Thank you.
That's an extremely powerful point. I think we have had a great day. We will start rounding up the discussions, and I would want to go to our panelists for their closing comments, and I want to start with Ruben. Ruben, I think you are muted.
Thank you very much, and indeed, very insightful. I am not muted. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, great. I thought the witch doctor had run away with the connection again.
Oh, you still have him in your pocket.
Oh, great. Yeah, but I noticed that my internet is not very, I have it in my pocket, but a good discussion. I think we need to build on this, and we need to work together as Africa. We need to be very clear on what we need from China. China has a very clear idea of what it needs from Africa, but our leaders and all of us need to work together to strategize on how we can work with China for our own economic development.
Can I go to Charlie for your closing comments?
Yeah, thank you. I think China is very, at this time, is very powerful, and we see how much difficulty it's, you know, even USA and European Union are facing now with China. So with Africa, we need actually to build a kind of strategy. And Ruben just talked of our leaders. The problem is that our leaders seems to, you know, coalesce with China, since they have their own, you know, they have their own ambition, and that is to be in power and to stay as much longer as they can. And that's a problem for us. We don't have those kind of leaders that would lead the fight. That's the problem. So we need to build those leaders among us, you know, because we have two kinds of fight here. We are fighting against our own leaders, and then we are fighting against China's leaders and ambition. So that's my own. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Charlie. Can we come to Rukaya for your closing comments?
Thank you very much, George. I think as closing comments, I I'm concerned about the closing space around information, legitimate public information where people have the right to know about big infrastructure projects, public money being wasted on unsolicited bids, on non-competitive bids, on projects that are of no relevance to the immediate priorities. So I think that closing space needs to be opened, needs to be forced by citizens. And I think, we need to get our governments become accountable to us, because, once we enter into that authoritarian sort of mode of operation, then we are done, So I think attentive to that information space. And I agree with all my colleagues about, this common coalition, this common alliance. Together, we can, create that matrix of information and start to sort of, understand better that pernicious way that China operates on our continent. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can we come to Sanusa for your closing comments?
Thank you indeed, Chair, and thank you to the panelists. I think it's very, very important that we have that cohesive approach in terms of how we not only deal with China, because it's China today, it's another rising power tomorrow. And I think that's the bigger question. China is becoming quite concerned about its PR image. That is why, under Xi Jinping, I think the idea of representing China as this actor that is not the West, that is not an imperial actor, it's not a colonial actor, is very important. Because one of the things that's happening in China, I think, and it's Ruben that picked it up, which was quite important, and that is how much of the anti-corruption stance that is taken by President Xi Jinping actually translates into their companies here. I think when it comes to state-owned enterprises, there's a much bigger stick that China wields against those kinds of actors in the continent. In the DRC, the question of how illegal mining and the small-scale private sector companies have actually tarnished the image of China has become a serious concern for Xi Jinping. And I think it's very important to understand where the levers are for us as civil society, both academia, think tanks, investigative journalists, media, to develop the narrative here. Don't let the narrative be developed outside, whether in China or whether in the West or wherever else. It must be developed here in Africa to hold not just the Chinese accountable, because the Chinese are like any other actor. I know Rukia said, is it a Chinese way of doing business? Well, I'll flip it around and say, everybody says to me when I interview them, whether it's USAID or whether it's the Western delegations of investment companies that come here to look to do business in Africa, the bottom line for everybody is the business of business is business. The question is, how do we translate those questions that we are raising right now in terms of achievable accountability and transparency? And I know that the challenge is not necessarily that China is the one that we have to basically unpack. I think where we need to start disaggregating is why our governments feel the necessary need to be confidential, to be tight-lipped about China. Because China is not necessarily this behemoth that is unpenetratable. It is, because if you hit China in the right way, they are really concerned. And I'm hoping on Thursday with one of our colleagues that's attending, she does a lot on PR and a lot on public diplomacy of China, and you'll see the shift. So that is where we have to think about this. And we have to bring it back to our governments and say, you creating the bogeyman here. It's not. China is just like any other actor. You need to find the lever to push the engagement.
Thank you, Sanusa. I come to Pauline for your closing comments.
Thank you so much. So my closing comments, for me, it's interesting to find that democratic states like Ghana are not immune from China's influence of their sharp power. I'm more focused on solutions. And as Sanusha said, we need as African countries to withstand this power. And for me, one of the ways we can do that is to build our own economies and have strong value propositions in our negotiations with China. Until we're able to do that, we can build all the capacity, we can, empower people. But if we still feel small, if we are not able to negotiate, if we don't know the value we bring to the table, we are always going to go back to the same situations. So I feel we need to understand the value that we have in our engagements with China. That will go a long way to withstanding their sharp power. Thank you.
Thank you very much, all of you. Brilliant day, brilliant presentations. I hope that we've all learned a lot from this engagement. If there are any takeaways, as all of you have said, we need to deepen our knowledge of the issues about Africa in the modern world, regardless of who we're dealing with, but also because China is a new guy in town, to understand how we are dealing with it. To do this, we really, really, really need to fight for the spaces that open up information to all of us. We need to build coalition as a continent about how to deal with these great powers. We need to understand that whether it's China or EU or whoever, these are powers that our individual capacities as nations and our small economies can't withstand. We need to work at our economy. But above all, the question of agency, we need to hold our government accountable in its dealings with China. Thank you very much for this wonderful day. And I hope that we have another opportunity to continue this conversation. Bye-bye.
Thank you, George,
Bye.
for moderation.
Thank you, everyone. Fantastic.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye. And thank you, George, for moderating.
Yes.
Thank you all. Thank you.